you kind of grew up in the Mountain View area?
Yes, yeah. Yeah, in the 1960s, from the late 50s on. And back then, Mountain View used to be a working class town, lots of orchards, but now it's almost in the middle of the Silicon Valley. We talk about change in Buddhism, but certainly I've seen it in the places that I've lived in, especially Mountain View.
Yeah. And as you kind of split your time between Japan and in the States and California, have you noticed
Yeah.
some change as you come back to California, come back to the East Bay, and notice changes as you come back over the years?
Yeah. Well, the most obvious one is the cost of living has definitely increased here. I've been coming back, almost every year because I've been back there in 25 years and coming back, and I've noticed the prices increasing, whereas Japan had just stayed, level off, and now, especially with the exchange rate, it's so obvious, and then so that's the most obvious one. But obviously, there's so many to think about when we talk about changes. I don't even know where to begin.
Yeah, no, it's a
Yeah.
ton. Yeah, it's a ton of
So yeah.
a lot of
So
time. Mhm.
have you been to Asia or Japan?
Yeah, when I was in the high school age, I was fortunate enough to go to Japan. I was able to go to Tokyo,
Hmm.
uh, Kyoto, and Mount Fuji area
Oh.
for
Mhm.
a trip, and oh, it was amazing. It
Oh.
was a really incredible experience. But that was years ago, and I hope to go
Yeah.
back another time.
Yeah.
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 What's something that when you go to Japan, is it Tokyo? Is that where you live as
Yeah.
part of
Yeah.
your time? What's something that you can't wait to get back to when you go to Tokyo? Is there something kind of food wise, or
Hmm.
just like a sense of that brings you kind of comfort as soon as you're back?
Uh, well, probably I don't have to drive. Back here, I got to get used to driving again, which, as you get older, it's a little bit, more demanding in some ways until you get a little bit used to it. But in Japan, in Tokyo, not Japan, because, in the countryside or even suburbs, even people in Tokyo, if you have children, you probably have a car. And whereas, just two of us. So we had a car, but my batteries ran out because we weren't using it. So we just got rid of it. And that's the one thing that really comes to mind. Yeah. Of course, food is cheap and very abundant. And you don't really have to cook because you have so many things that you can just go to a nearby convenience store and just buy it conveniently. And they're really good. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, I mean, I remember having some of the best food I think I've ever had during my trip there.
Mm.
It really is amazing,
Yeah.
and I know that. So as you kind of split your time between California and Tokyo, and I, I I noticed that you have a background in teaching as a professor in both areas in both.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I was curious, like, what is it like to teach Buddhism and talk about Buddhism to two different um, student bodies, like
Yeah.
one
Yeah.
that's based in the tradition, Jodo Shinshu tradition within Japan, and then also within the United States.
Yeah. Well, it's kind of complicated, but obviously I'm dealing with two different kinds of students. In the US, I was teaching at a graduate school and seminary, meant for training ministers for future Jodo Shinshu ministers. And then, the position that I had was at a Buddhist-based university, but liberal arts university, and they were required to take a class in Buddhism for the freshmen in the freshman year, but they're not, graduate students. So they're not specialized in Buddhism. So on two different levels, and but I enjoyed both, and then I also teach a lot of adults in Japan as well. Now that I've retired on Zoom, I have a number of classes that I teach, more on the spiritual level, Buddhism in general, and Shin Buddhism in specifically. And I also do that online for American and Canadian students on Zoom, which I've started you know 4 years ago, and so I right now have kind of global audience in teaching not basic Buddhism and Shin Buddhism in particular. Yeah.
Wow, that's incredible. That especially what Zoom is kind of allowing you to do, which is to reach
Yeah.
so many
Yeah.
different people all over. Have you found this style of teaching, or this this demographic of teaching, that are kind of people in their adulthood that are a little bit more uh, the spiritual questions, or maybe are a little bit more front of mind
Yeah.
than the kids that are just kind of doing it as a part of their required course load for
Yeah.
something in their undergraduate level? Is there territory that you like to get into with these adult classes?
Yeah. Well, I prefer dealing with the adults. I mean, they have more questions, they volunteer to take the courses and not as compulsory course at a university. So I don't miss teaching 19-year-olds compulsory course at a university. I had to tell a lot of jokes in order to keep them attentive. But I also I like Buddhist humor, so I try to intertwine that in my talks for every group of audience. So yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's something that I've just, when in preparation for our conversation, I've looked up some of your work, and I've seen some of your interviews and talks, and I've noticed that Buddhism and humor comes up
Yeah.
for you. I think that's been a long term interest of yours, and I was curious, where do you find that? Is it kind of uh, in sutras, or in just cultural contexts as they approach Buddhism? Like, where do you find that humor?
Well, probably more in the cultural context is especially, American religious humor is quite well known, and I especially the English humor I get from internet or hear people talking, and so but there isn't a whole lot in the scriptures. I mean, you can find them, some I find humorous, even though the sutras were not meant to be humorous, intentionally. So yeah, it comes from various sources, and there's also in Japan a tradition of kind of a Buddhist humor that was told from classical times, and there you find I find sufficient number of entries or to share. Um, so, but sometimes culturally they don't carry across culture, so I have to be careful whenever I share my humor. So yeah.
Well, that's great though that you have a chance to, or you have the capacity to understand humor from multiple cultural backgrounds. So at the very least, you get to ingest, or like engage with jokes from a variety of cultures, and be able to kind of
Yeah.
have that resonance
Yeah.
with different things like that. Is
And
there is there one element of humor, like at least for like an English speaking, or maybe
yeah.
an American English speaking
Yeah.
context, that you find particularly, I guess, advantageous for teaching elements of Buddhism? Like, is there
Yeah.
like a one
Yeah,
topic? Yeah.
number of them come to mind, but one that just comes to mind, and this is something I heard from an older minister, when I was younger, and I'm trying to find a scriptural source for this, but I call it cliffhanger. A guy is hanging on to for dear life at the edge of a cliff, which is 100 yards down. And so, it's life and death. So he's really grabbing onto it, he's saying, help, help. And then the Buddha emerges above the cliff, and he goes, "Oh, great! Oh, Buddha, save me!" And then the Buddha says, "I will. Let go." Okay, so but from the Buddha's perspective, it's not 100-yard cliff. It's only 1 yard to the ground. And so it's instructive the way we deal with what we consider to be suffering or a problem is that we think everything's like it's 100 yards down, as if you're clinging to a cliff 100 yards down. But from a Buddhist perspective, it's no big deal. It's only 1 yard, so just let go, and you'll be all right. And so, I mean, that I guess goes to the crux, the heart of what Buddhism is saying. In reality, things are, as it is, and most often, it's only a yard. You're only a yard up, yard high, and so I love that one, and so yeah.
Yeah, no, that's a really good one. And
Yeah.
it is about kind of reorienting your perspective and kind of appreciating that, whether or not the distance is such, in the grand scheme of things and within a Buddhist context,
Yeah.
it is about letting go of
Yeah.
something. And but that could be so hard. Like, you really are clinging for
Yeah.
your dear
Yeah.
life. You're there's this other analogy. It just reminds me of something. I used to do some improv comedy in my life. I used to do
Oh.
entertainment, and there's this one teacher who told a story about uh, someone skydiving, and
Uh-huh.
they're jumping out of a plane, and they their parachute's not working, and then their backup parachute's not working. And
Yeah.
so instead of kind of curling up in a ball as they rocket towards the ground with no hope for anything, they decide to change their plummeting into a vast, beautiful exercise in acrobatics. And so they're doing
Oh.
flips, and they're doing spins and twirls and do all this gliding, because they're taking advantage of that time
Mm-hmm.
that they're about to, careen into their demise. They're using it to do something expressive and beautiful and fun. And there's
Mm.
this, I feel like there's a correlation where it's like, we're here for this moment, and once you let go of that kind of like well, you can't cling to anything if you're falling from the sky, really, right? So you might as
Mm-hmm.
well just enjoy and let go,
Oh.
and then be free as
Yeah.
you kind of do that thing.
Yeah.
So it's a morbid story, but it both kind of has that element of safety in the letting go. It's like, once you
Yeah.
stop trying, you can kind of.
Well, in a way, I mean, this applies to a lot of things that happen in our everyday lives. When you're arguing about something with your spouse or your family member or your friends, it turns out it's really think about it. It's no big deal. It's not 100-yard, high cliff. It's only 1 yard, and just let go. But having said that, however, it's very hard because we are, driven by three poisons, but at least to recognize that fact that oftentimes you're making a big deal out of nothing, or something that is not all that important.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I think that goes to the heart of Buddhism, is that, what happens in the world happens, but it's how you take it, how you interpret it. And I use the analogy of the horizontal axis and a vertical axis. The horizontal axis is more the objective reality in which we live. Much of it we cannot control. But what we can control is the vertical axis or dimension, where, through proper practice and training and wisdom and compassion and understanding, you're a little bit better. You go climb higher on that vertical axis towards ultimately Buddhahood. And so it's how you take it. And, it may not be Buddhism. I mean, there are other philosophies have said the same things. It's not what happens to you, but how you experience, especially the negativity, what you consider to be not going your way. I did want to kind of follow up on your talk of story of the falling
Mm,
parachuter.
mm,
This is well, it doesn't go, well, it goes to interreligious dialogue, or and it goes like this. There was a Shin Buddhist, and he always wanted to be a paratrooper, and American Shin Buddhist, and and he learned how to jump off the plane, and the sergeant told him, when the first one doesn't open, you have a spare, and that always opens, so don't worry. So finally, he jumps off. He gets cold feet. He doesn't want to jump off, but sergeant pushes him off. So he's falling through, and the time comes for him to pull the main parachute. He pulls it, but that doesn't open. And so he says, "Oh, that's right." Sergeant says, "There's a spare one." That he pulls that one, and that doesn't open. And he goes, "Oh no!" And so he recites the Nembutsu, the name calling Amida Buddha. Amitabha. So he says, Namanda, Namanda, Namanda. And the golden hands of Amida comes and catches him. But he goes, thank God. and then there are different versions to it, that the Amida opened his palms, and he let him fall. And I tell people that version is not good, because Amida Buddha is all compassionate, and he's not a jealous Buddha. And so he will, even though he said, thank God, he will, let him down gently to the ground and allow him to survive. And so that's kind of that has a message on an interreligious level, especially for a Shin Buddhist growing, who is an American, and influenced by American culture, where God is more dominant.
Yeah.
So,
Wow. Yeah, I definitely appreciate the humor of that, and yeah, and there's could the argument also be made that the Amida's compassion was also in the sergeant kind of pushing the person
oh
out, and kind of creating the situation to
yeah,
then eventually be carried, and then to be called enough to say the name, or
yeah.
something like that.
Yeah. Well, that's a no, I never even thought about that. So, it's nice to have, so humor, if you share it, you get, a reaction that, deepens the meaning of that, original story, the humorous, yeah.
Yeah. Well, and as far as like when you are talking about Amita's compassion and saying the name and things like that to your adult classes and all of that, like what are some concerns that come up, or what are some questions that come up as far as like wanting to deepen their understanding
Yeah.
of using the Nimbutsu?
Well, often you get, well, it almost sounds like magical incantation, that your act of reciting Namo Amida Butsu is becomes the efficient cause for you to be saved. But that is, so I was saying, it's not something that you do, but it's more of event. It has to be tied to realization, an awakening, opening of your heart. And so the essence of Shin Buddhism can be represented by an experience called shinjin. Literally, it's faith mind, or entrusting mind. But it's more than that. It's more of an awakening to the fact that, for one, you are a limited, imperfect being. Really fully come to realization. Or another way of saying, limited in a sense that, we can't control everything, and that what we can do is quite limited. And we tend to be very egotistical, ego-centered. But that's the first level of realization. Second level is that we are embraced in what we call Amida. It's not a person personified, but it's well, there are different ways of expressing it. It's expression of oneness, that we are all interrelated, interconnected, and that fundamentally it has an element of compassion that will embrace you even after death. So you realize this in life, in life. And so that has to be at the heart of it. So if you have an element of that realization, shinjin realization, then reciting the name is not so, it's more of an expression of gratitude for the fact that I have been able to see, truer reality in a better way, and that I realize that I am fine just as I am. And so that's that's why it's often referred to as the teaching is referred to as other power tradition. But I'm actually doing I've been holding a series of symposium through University of British Columbia on other power outside of Pure Land Buddhism. And so when people say other power, they immediately associate it with Pure Land Buddhism, but it's found throughout Mahayana Buddhism, especially, and even to the earliest experience, the enlightenment experience of the Buddha. There are elements that I feel, or many other scholars feel, are evident in that Shakyamuni Buddha's original experience of something that is not something that you only create, that you bring about, but it's something that it's a realization that comes from without, from beyond you. And so anyway, so I've kind of gone a little too elaborated.
No, that's fascinating. No,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
Well, but if you don't mind, where else are you finding other power in other avenues
Oh,
of Mahayana? Like, is it within the Tibetan lineages, or within Zen, or anything like that?
yeah. Well, you spoke of Zen, and in Dogen has that famous quote, uh, the the purpose of Buddhism or essence of Buddhism is to know the self. To know the self is to forget the self. And to forget the self means to be enlightened by all things. Or Bampo ni sho seraruru nari in original. So the all things, and sho seraruru is a term that is hard to translate into English, but it means something, it's often translated as being enlightened by all things, or supported by all things. So there is an element that goes beyond yourself. And so Dogen is pretty clear on that. And then for Dogen, a lot of people, even in our Shin tradition, they mistakenly think that we are other power and Zen is self-power. But in reality, Dogen Zen, at least, Dogen Zen is much more other power, because of the passage that I just quoted. But at the same time, he has a term is practice and realization are one. Shu sho ittai, So shu sho ittai means, practice is not, so the enlightenment is where you are practicing, is one way of talking about it. Where you do your zazen, your sitting meditation, essentially enlightenment is here and now in front of you, right under your nose. And then so it's not so zazen is not a means to get to enlightenment, but enlightenment is already here. And so you find other passages like that in Dogen, but well, you get the Yogacara, you find what is called true listening that emanates from Dharmakaya. So, well, I mean, Yogacara is such a vast area, but one of the teachings say that, there's a more difficult way, a monastic way of realizing, but there's also simply by listening to the true teaching, which will perfume the unconsciousness or the consciousness. So Shomon Kunju, Shomon is truly listening, leads to Kunju is perfume. So the consciousness, and that emanates from Dharmakaya, the ultimate reality. Dharmakaya Nishyanda. Nishyanda is Sanskrit for flowing out, flows out of the Dharmakaya. And so the Dharma is something that comes from the oneness, or the Dharmakaya. Well, the oneness I translated for Dharmakaya, Tatatar, Dharmata, now all these, terms that Mahayana uses for talking about the ultimate reality. And so, and then with Buddha's enlightenment itself, there's a text called Udana, more like the exclamation of, his exclamation. It's not doctrinal, and in the Udana which discusses the 3 watches of the night through which he attained so-called enlightenment, and there is a passage element of that says something to the effect that the dharmas manifest, which then gives you a basis for awakening. So dharmas, and then the question is what are the dharmas, and even the experts have different views on it, but either whether it's dharma singular or, well, actually the original original Pali is plural, so dharmas, and one of my colleague friends interprets it more as like codependent origination or interdependence, and again, we're not quite sure what it means. So I'm having him really dig into this and write a paper on this for an anthology we're doing on other power. So we have this from Tibetan tradition, Korean tradition, Chinese tradition, all outside of Pure Land Buddhism, and even with Shakyamuni Buddha. So, especially in the West, because of the Christian background, the monotheistic background, people who take interest in Buddhism want to kind of shy away from the other power dimension. But, there's a lot of other power dimension. It is ultimately a world religion, like Christianity and Islam, and that it's not just simply philosophy. And Pure Land Buddhism is probably is embraced in that tradition, and to perhaps to a greater extent, because it even posits a realm beyond this earth called Pure Land. But I usually explain Pure Land as and Amida Buddha. These are 2 dimensions of the ultimate reality or oneness, and Amida Buddha is more the dynamic dimension that flows out, and the English word would be workings of Amida, or Amida is the working that manifests in different ways, and then Pure Land is a realm, more the static dimension. So the dynamic dimension, Pure Land is a static dimension, which is a realm after we get rid of this body and we become part of the Pure Land. And then, well, Pure Land has undergone development. And in Shin Buddhism, we do not need to spend any time in the Pure Land, but we become immediately Buddhas, and then we come back, you see. So that's another element that is hard for people who are not familiar with, who are familiar with the Judeo-Christian tradition, where you go to heaven and live eternal life happily ever after. But with Pure Land Buddhism, you become a Buddha, and then you return, or you go to other realms, but you return to the Saha realm. And that dimension too is interesting, and frankly gives me kind of a spiritual comfort in knowing that I will hopefully become Buddha and come back as part of the oneness that we are part of. And so
Yeah, I mean, thank you for getting into this, because it's such a rich area for me, just as someone that grew up, here in America with I grew up Catholic, and I'm relatively new to Buddhism, so I'm still like learning a whole lot about it, and understanding Pure Land and how you're describing it is yeah, I mean, there's so much spiritual inspiration as far as the ability to go into a Pure Land as a Buddha come back and return, or return to other realms to share the Dharma, to help inspire others, or maybe just again to become a Buddha once again. And I know, I think I've seen some talks with you, or some text, some writings from you, where you discuss uh, a Pure Land as existent, like in the here and now too, where it's not necessarily as this thing that's
Yeah.
necessarily, other, quote unquote, but like is a shift in perspective of what we're experiencing in this samsaric world.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that part is differs depending on the school. Where is a Pure Land? That's the question. And the Zen people and other traditions in Mahayana Buddhism talk of Pure Land more in the here and now. In fact, I think Vimalakirti Nirdesha Sutra talks about Pure Land as the purified mind. When the mind is pure or enlightened, that's the Pure Land. That's the extreme form of immanent dimension. But Zen people talk about, when one is enlightened, this realm, Saha realm, becomes a Pure Land. And in the more orthodox Shin tradition, we say, my mind plays in the Pure Land, but never claim that this world is a Pure Land. And I feel comfortable with that, in that if you look at the world, it's not Pure Land. I mean, we got the war in Ukraine and Gaza, and how can 40,000 people die, innocent people? And I cannot claim, when you see things of that nature, to say that so this Sahara world is a Pure Land. So maybe subjectively, you have sense of greater beauty and sense of gratitude, and you can feel as if your life is a Pure Land. But I would not go so far as to claim that the Saha world is objectively a Pure Land. So I think with Shin Buddhism, in shinjin realization and in trusting, your subjective life is like much more like a Pure Land. You're more grateful, you have greater assurance, greater clarity, greater concern for other people. These are all there, but I cannot claim that this world is objectively Pure Land. So you do the best you can in this life to show the way, if people are interested, that through this spiritual path, you can find the Pure Land within, in a sense. Although Shin Buddhism will never say that, my mind plays in the Pure Land. But, it's a sense of spiritual happiness that I think, I always say that, Buddhism doesn't have monopoly on truth, and that, I happen to be a Shin Buddhist, I happen to be a Buddhist, but I don't claim that my way is the only way, and so I think that position is very important for us to keep in mind. And
Yeah, and I was curious about that too, where and I definitely appreciate your openness to other paths, or just other perspectives, even within the same kind of tradition. But growing up, I mean, did you grow up in a Jodo Shinshu household, or did you experiment with some other different traditions and even different faith traditions overall?
yeah, well, I grew up in a typical Japanese family, and I think we were Shin Buddhists, but my parents were never religious in going to church. But um, when I was, my family has been going back and forth since my great grandfather's period. He immigrated to Hawaii. My mother was born in Hawaii, and so, but anyway, so I lived in Japan for the first 10 years. I came here at the age of 10 in 1958 to Mountain View, and then I went to a Christian church for a year and a half, from 11 to about almost close to 13, and it was happened to be more the conservative, Seventh Day Adventist, and and people are very nice. They're, very friendly and supportive. I liked the minister. I respected him. But I had problem with the notion, the fundamental notion, stance that God created everything. And but you look around and you see all the suffering, and my parents didn't get along very well, so my family environment was not a happy one. And so if God created, why couldn't he have done a better job? you know. And then we moved to another part of town, and then next door there was a Shin Buddhist lady, and who said, "Well, you have to go to the Buddhist church." So my parents didn't take me. My parent of a neighbor took me, and that's when I met. I ran into Buddhism, and it happened to be a Shin Buddhist temple in Mountain View. It still exists now, and so I know and also having grown up in America, that you can't get away from the quote Judeo-Christian perspective. We have a lot of assumptions, and one of the things I talked about in my other book, where we're doing the Pledge of Allegiance, and I was like fifth grade, sixth grade, and by the time I was like seventh grade, I was much more conscious of being a Buddhist. And so I had difficulty saying God, under God. And so I had different strategies for how to deal with that. But I don't want to go into detail. But so yeah. And so living in America, you automatically are subjected to a worldview that is, Christian and Jewish in nature. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, and on the youth note, because I think I came across you wrote a book somewhat recently. I think it's Jules, an
Yeah.
introduction to American
Yeah.
Buddhism for youth, scouts, and the young at heart,
Yeah.
and with a bit of humor.
Yeah.
And from what I understand, in that book you talk about kind of appreciating the inner and outer jewels,
Yeah.
uh, but also talking about your appreciation for the Boy Scouts and or
Yeah.
the Scouts of America.
Right. Right.
And I just was curious about like how did that experience being a Boy Scout move you, and what do you find important about it for today?
Well, yeah, that book actually. Before I forget, I'm actually starting a online course on monthly for about 10 months based on that book. So hopefully somehow after we finish, you could promote that that course, and they can download that book free of charge. So as for the Boy Scout, well, I mean, I joined the Boy Scouts, I guess, through school or my neighbor, and we all, Troop 42, I still remember the troop number, and really it was a fun and meaningful endeavor. And with so I it wasn't, I didn't learn, I mean, I cannot put it in the context of Buddhism or religion, but you did get, I did get the sense that we want to do something for society, a service, that part. And then probably more importantly, I talk about it briefly there, but I came from a poor part of Mountain View, but and a lot of my classmates were in the same boat, working class. And then but the people who supported it, the scoutmaster and all that, they came from the other side, the better part of town, and they probably put in a lot of money into that troop. And I knew then that they were doing community service for those of us who were in the lower side of town. And that came through, and I still till this day, I really cannot forget it. I mean, I appreciate what they have done, and they've given me a sense of the importance of sharing, what you have for those who are less privileged. And so that kind of message has carried throughout my life. So it started in Boy Scouts. And so yeah. So that's why when the Boy Scouts of America uh, had is related to the Buddhist Churches of America, to which I, it's a Shin Buddhist organization that belongs that I also belong to. And when they asked me to write a book for youth, for the Scouts, I so that's the genesis of that book, and so it's yeah. But when I wrote the preface, that my earliest encounter with my True 42 had all that dimension to it, a sense of responsibility to the community, and the fact that I was benefited from what others were doing. And because I got to go to camp almost once every 2 months on the camping, and whereas my parents were just too busy and couldn't take us. And so that kind of experience really gave me greater sense of confidence, respect, and gratitude to the society community to which you belong. Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't do the scouts myself. I had some friends that did it, and just as someone that is kind of an outsider, I would see the scouts as an opportunity to have camaraderie, as an opportunity to whittle and to get badges and to campfire and to do some survival basics and some important things and things like that. And then yes, there's the almost Rockefeller or Norman Rockwell painting of someone, a Boy Scout, kind of helping an elderly woman across the street kind of service, kind of picture that comes to mind when I think of the Scouts. And yet when I hear your experiences, it was the service element, it was the generosity, the sharing, and the care, and the doesn't matter what social demographic you come from. It's about kind of making sure that everyone's taken care of and gets to experience things together and share that.
Yeah.
So I think that's a really wonderful thing to think about when you think about the Scouts for America or Scouts of America, and also and for your experiences camping. I mean, did that do anything for you as you were developing and shaping your Buddhist path? I mean, did the being out in the woods do anything for you?
Well, that not directly or specifically that I can recall, but I've always appreciated nature. I think many people do, but so when we talk about interconnectedness, nature crops up immediately, because without nature we cannot survive. The water and the air and the oxygen. And so that's always in the back of my mind when I think about interconnectedness. Yeah.
And
So
mm, is there anything like Scouts for America or of America in Japan right now? Is there any kind of initiative that's like that where they can kind of experience that interconnectedness of nature as youths there?
oh, sure. I mean, Boy Scout is well, I'm not. You find many Boy Scout troops, and often uh, there are Buddhist temples that have scouts, especially Shin Buddhism, because Shin Buddhism, the founder of Shin Buddhism is called Shinran, and he was married. He was the first prominent monk to have gotten married in the 13th century. And so it's family oriented. So the temples have programs for some temples, and they had world jamborees in Japan many times. And Shin Buddhism plays the most prominent role compared to other schools. And yeah, so yeah, it's prevalent.
Wow, I didn't realize the Scouts were such an international.
Oh yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
oh, that's great. Oh,
Well,
that's
they
cool.
have international jamborees, so and yeah.
Is that a big conference or the Jamboree, or is
Yeah,
it?
jamboree is where, yeah, it's like a huge, several days that people gather and they camp together, and
Oh,
I
wow.
I haven't gone to any in Japan, but I think when I was a Scouts in California, I went to a more of a district level gatherings like that. Yeah. Yeah.
And you mentioned Shinran, and I was curious because I saw, as I was looking things up, I saw that you took part in some celebrations of his 750th, I think, anniversary or something like that. And what's that experience like when you're celebrating someone, 750 years after they were
Mm.
doing their thing or they were born, and you're together with this movement that's been
Mm.
generations upon generations of development, and then you get to take part in kind of a momentous year number for that.
Yeah.
What was that like being a part of that?
Well, first of all, in Japanese culture values memorial service, you know, more so than birthday. And so so there's great weight put on and the death of an important person. So memorializing their contribution. And so yeah, I mean the Buddhist organization, specifically the Buddhist Churches of America, which, by the way, is probably the oldest surviving, continuously existing Buddhist group in America. In Hawaii, started in 1889, in mainland 1899. So we're actually observing on the mainland 125th, as we speak at the end of this month, and so it's existed continuously. And although Chinese Buddhism was the first to start build a temple in America, probably around 1852, but they all kind of died out, and then there were never professional priests like the Japanese tradition. And so ever since from the very beginning, you've had professionals, the priests who oversaw. But anyway, and going back to your question as to how I feel about it, well, it's like any other kind of anniversary of a particular organization that you participate, you sense of a feeling of camaraderie, a sense of a common ancestor lineage to which you are a part, and then you are motivated to do your best as we go forward, and so those are the sentiments that I feel, and yeah.
Yeah, and it's amazing too that you also, I mean, just in thinking about the upcoming anniversary, which I think is being celebrated September 1st. Is that right?
Yeah, I think it's around, yeah,
Around
around
there,
yeah,
around
well,
that, yeah.
yeah. Mhm.
And that's amazing, 125 years. And then you were just saying that you grew up, you found yourself at the Mountain View Temple, which is still existent today, and then you can kind of connect with that, this longevity that happens. You just kind
Yeah,
of get to take a moment to appreciate,
sure.
the consistency, but also the change, and kind of reestablish where you are, but also take part in a traditional memorial event,
Yeah,
or like I guess, an anniversary event that
sure.
you all to get to take part of. Wow, well,
Yeah.
congratulations to the BCA and
Yeah.
the community,
Well,
because I mean,
it's not only the founder. I mean, I think, as you were talking, uh, the images of uh, the predecessors, including especially my spiritual teachers, crop up in my, mind's eye. Uh, and because they're part of that tradition. If it weren't for them, I wouldn't be where I am today. And because there was a tradition that had these, teachers who made it possible for me to plug into that tradition. And so, yeah. Um,
is there one?
at the same time,
Hmm?
yeah.
Go ahead, please.
Just briefly, at the same time, I also feel that I'm part of a broader Buddhist tradition that came actually from Europe through the academics. The academic dimension, more the intellectual part of it, is here in America. And but the fact that I did my PhD at the University of California in Berkeley, that tradition has part of that tradition comes from East, from Europe. And so you have the intellectual Buddhism, that brand of intellectual Buddhism to which I have been impacted as I studied, at UC Berkeley. But at the same time, the Shinran's tradition that came through the Mount View Buddhist Temple. So, I have two streams. Now that I think about it, it just dawned on me as I was talking to you. I never thought it in those terms. Yeah.
Yeah, where you get to be this place where it all coalesces. You get to be
Yeah.
where and you get to express this bridge just by your own experience
Yeah.
of walking your path. That's well, I'm glad that that you found that for yourself and that you got to experience that where you have two different branches that kind of fulfill you in different ways or kind of answer certain questions that others might other areas might not. And as far as the spiritual teachers that you've had, is there one in particular that comes to mind that
Yeah.
you'd
Sure.
want to talk about, or there's just
Sure.
too many
Sure.
to count? Yeah.
Um, After I did my undergraduate, I attended a place called the Institute of Buddhist Studies, which now continues to exist in Berkeley. And as a seminary and graduate school. And there actually are two teachers that I want to mention. One is more of a spiritual teacher who was the director of the institute, and he taught chanting, but he was an exemplar by the way he just was, the way he carried himself and his dedication and soft-spokenness, but still he had a firm conviction that we all respected. So his name was Reverend Kusada. And then the other person is Professor Miyagi, who came from Japan after retired from the university there, because he had three sons who were ministers in North America. And so after he retired, he and his wife moved to California and Los Angeles, but he flew up and did intensive courses at the Institute of Buddhist Studies, which we shorten abbreviated IBS. And anyway, so it was him who provided kind of the academic Shin tradition to me, and in a way, I feel through connections to him, I feel I have come to experience what I like to think is the shinjin, realization in this, when I was younger, and then which continue to deepen. But whenever I think about the heart of the teaching, I feel his presence. It's really interesting that when we talk about shinjin, that if it were not for him, I probably wouldn't have felt it, bodily, physically. And it's more than just the intellectual assent to a certain belief, but it's something that came through in my contact with him, and listening and learning from him. So and I think it's that's been the tradition in Buddhism from the very beginning, that I think we can all intellectual or knowledge can be gotten through books and lectures, but something that's much deeper requires, I think, a contact with a real person. And and I know Tibetan Buddhism emphasizes to a greater extent. I think sometimes it goes too far. Guru worship. I don't worship my teacher, but both of them gave me a kind of a non-intellectual, visceral appreciation, and so yeah.
So when you were in contact with them, did this sort of develop gradually where you started to kind of feel this like bodily wisdom or knowledge that you were getting from them, or were there some instances where you were seeing them answer other questions for students or go about, walking around the campus or something like that, that kind of was like, oh, that they are moving with compassion, or they are engaged in a different way that is inspiring to me, and I'm actually being moved by this in some way.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, just being around them was always inspiring, not ecstatic, but, you see, aha, they are people that I like to emulate. And I know that they embody what I consider to be true for myself. But there was one experience with Professor Miyagi when I had become actually a young faculty member at IBS later, and he was giving a lecture, and he wrote on the wall something to the effect that the essence of Amida is great compassion, and it's something that I have known, I mean, intellectually, but that moment I felt a sense of aha, it's like great aha, nodding, and felt something from without, and that particular moment I have never forgotten. And I realized that even as I was experiencing that, oh, this is something that I have never experienced. And I'm not really into like what spiritual what extraordinary experience, but definitely it was nothing like I had ever experienced. And but it wasn't grandiose, but it's something like a huge that's right, the essence of Amida is compassion. And I had written articles about that, as a graduate student, but this time it kind of, sank in maybe. And then what's more important is that, well, this is going to take more time, so I won't go into detail. But later, when I was professor back in Japan, when I was 67, this experience, the first experience was probably in my 30s. And so I was asked by my graduate students in Japan to talk about, religious experience, or I was asking my students to, share their religious. After they finished, they said, "Oh, how about you?" And so I wasn't prepared to talk about it, but then I was, I said, "Oh, okay, well, if experience would be what I had experienced with Professor Miyagi." And as I was doing this, sharing, I got so emotional, so moved. I couldn't finish. And I was surprised, was all, astonished that, because I've never experienced anything like that. And so I had to tell the students, okay, class is over, because we're at the end of the class anyway. And ever since, when I was in my 60s, that particular experience, which was 25 years after the first experience, okay, my fear, so I often, when I took naps, used to get this kind of almost a feeling of terror about my personal death. Not all the time, but quite often. And it's something that, I didn't want to, feel. But ever since that experience in sharing my, experience many years ago, that has almost completely ceased to be experienced when I took naps or whatever. And so it's almost one objective evidence of something has happened in my, being. And having said that, of course, I still don't want to die. It's not like I understood it all. I'm enlightened. Frankly speaking, I feel that, we cannot overcome the three poisons if you're an ordinary being living in householder life. If you're a monk or nun in a, pristine environment, you may. But even then, I think if they were to come back to the nitty-gritty, regular life, I think you will not. So I have felt that, in this life, for householders, ordinary beings living ordinary lives, you can still experience some level of awakening or insight, which Satori, or whatever that means in Zen, but in Rinzai Zen, they have a particular term called Kensho, seeing the nature. And, I think D.T. Suzuki, when he talks about Satori, I think he means that level. And I feel like shinjin in Shin tradition is equivalent to that. And you don't overcome, there are 6 defilements in Mahayana Buddhism. The first 3 are, greed, hatred, and ignorance. And then there's the 4th one is pride. Those 4 are awfully, difficult to overcome simply. But there are the 2 others which have to do with, views, called drishti in Sanskrit, and also vichikitsa is doubt. So the last 2, the views, wrong views, and doubt, they are more intellectual in nature, not deep-seated. And so, they make a distinction between defilement that is, over deep and the defilement or obstructions that can be overcome by changing your views, so that views, those 2 can be realized by ordinary beings living in a secular context. And I feel like Shinjin and Kensho are on that level. And so but that doesn't mean that you're completely enlightened. You still don't want to die, and et cetera, et cetera. So my talking about this there's a reason for that. Is often Shin Buddhism or Pure Land Buddhism is considered to be folk religion, that it's just devotional. But in Shin Buddhism, you do have this level of awakening called shinjin that is equivalent to the first stage of first stage of the sages, or I hadn't mentioned that level. Is a stream enterer, or in Mahayana Buddhism, it's called the stage of joy. It's the first level of the bhumis. And so I think we can talk about it in those terms. And I would never, be so bold as to say you can overcome the top 4, the other 4, because they are so deep-seated. I have become a kind of an avid fan of Shohei Ohtani, the baseball player with the Dodgers now. Well, I used to be Giants fan, Willie Mays and Orlando Cepeda, and I used to follow them. But now, 3 years ago, I've become so. By being an avid baseball fan, you realize how attached you are, and you don't like it when your team loses. You say, "Oh, it's only a game," but and I'm even a little bit better now because I'm more concerned about the presidential election right now. So I've forgotten Shohei Ohtani, although I still follow him. I want the Dodgers to win, but we have bigger issues to think about. So anyway, my point for mentioning this is that we are fundamentally attached to wanting things to go your way. It's and in Shin Buddhism we call it bombu, being foolish, ordinary, imperfect being, and it's okay, and that that's the way we are, but we are embracing something greater. And that when we come to realize, and you think about other people, and you're more grateful and you're happier. And so anyway.
Yeah. No, that was wonderful. I particularly appreciated that the 6 what was
the obstructions
obstructions, yeah.
Yeah.
But you describing in the way that you did made it feel so much more approachable or accessible as someone walking a path where those first 4, that's tough for anybody. That's tough for even the people that retreat into a monastery, or retreat away from this more family society-based life.
Yeah.
But then these last 2 though, doubt, and what was the other one?
Views, and more specifically called drishti in Sanskrit, or ditti in Pali, but these are views, attached views about and one of which is attachment to the substantial nature of the self, non-self. So you come to realize that you're not less attached to the substantial self. Yeah.
Yeah. I think that when you, I mean, I'm relatively new to my Soto Zen path in general, but but aspiration wise, if you want to call it that, like to want to try to achieve some sort of kensho, or to open myself up to having something like shinjin in my life to help make me that two stages a little bit better, can lead to a boomy, or can lead to kind of a windfall of of all the other decks of cards, kind of or dominoes kind of falling suit. I think like there's something about making that, the way that you described it, make it feel like it's possible, and then also putting into a realistic context, where it's like, even there's the Buddha was able to do all this the kind of more complete awakening. Everybody else, it's a really big challenge, and it's something to appreciate. And then also too, while we're on it, I'm a Giants fan, and I know exactly what you mean, right? Where you're trying to be balanced, try not to get too attached, and then it hurts every time your team loses, and especially in the eighth inning. Like, how do you just you let 3 runs go? Like, how'd you do that?
Yeah.
I will say that as a Giants fan, I lived in LA for a little bit, and there's something about the Dodgers that are just so baseball, just like how the Yankees are so baseball, that even if you're a rival, it's a rival team with the SF Giants. There is something about the Dodgers that I just appreciate, and Shohei is just such a dream to watch. I really wish he came to the Bay Area, but that's okay. But I appreciate that that analogy, because it's just a quick little. How am I doing on my path? Oh yeah, that's right. I'm really upset about them losing, and so that's where I'm at. But yeah, so I really appreciate that. And then I know we're kind of coming to a close here, and I wanted to ask if there's anything that you'd want to promote, or shine a light on. I know, and I do want to get back into this course that you're building around the Jules book. But if there's something else that you're working on, while we talk about that as well, something else that you're working on, or if you have any advice for anyone that is at any point along the Buddhist path that you'd want to share.
Yeah. Well, there's so much that does come to mind, but well, this one subject has to do with the difference between spirituality and religion. Religion is a larger category, and recently we had a symposium with the Buddhist Church of America, and they were talking about orthodoxy. And these 3 speakers were, very learned, committed, and they stressed the importance of, shinjin awakening, or kensho and awakening. And that definitely is important. And sometimes, temples and churches become more of a social center, and especially in terms of Japanese American Shin Buddhism, it has been a kind of a cultural center as well. So there's always that tension between the spiritual, the Buddhist, and the cultural. But when we're talking about religion and how we approach people to take interest in Buddhism, if we emphasize the spiritual, the purity of the spiritual part too much, and that's all we talk about, then we will lose some of these people who may be not as interested. And let's face it, majority of the people in the world are not as focused on the spirituality, but they can be, in a way, just as good people. They can be kind and decent and concerned about other people, even though they don't fully understand. But even those people can, of course, benefit from what the spiritual tradition can provide, not only spiritual, but ethically and morally. And so I guess I'm saying that when we talk about Buddhism in America, is that we need to have a broader perspective. I use an analogy of a mountain, and it's like if you want to go for the deepest dimensions of spirituality, it's like going up to the top of the mountain. But there are a lot of people who are in the middle of the mountain or at the foot of the mountain. And so we need to have an openness to be accommodating to people like them as well, and not become too egotistical, or that the only way to be a Buddhist is to attain and search, to the highest level, and that's fine for yourself. But if you're thinking about the broader context, there are different levels at which people, come into Buddhism. And, actually in Japan, of course, you have a similar situation, but because of a long history of Buddhism in Japan, most people plug in through what I call the ancestor veneration, funerals, memorial services, and gravesite. And so that is somewhat of a problem. I wish more people would take interest in the teachings. So, but anyway, this issue is a huge issue, especially in light of the fact that some organizations, Buddhism as a religion is losing members, and which can be said for Christianity and religion in America, because we know now the younger people, 40% of younger generation are unaffiliated, and so you find that true in America, which is probably the most religious country in the West. I mean, major country. So even America is already experiencing secularism, and in Japan, in a way, is kind of a secular society too, even though they have connections to the temple through funeral and memorial services. But so anyway, this is a huge issue. But I just wanted to, when you asked me that question, that's the one thing that's on my mind, because when I give my courses, well, when I give my courses, then it's easier in that we are getting people who are deeply interested in the higher levels of spirituality. So that's why I like to do it. And I don't think I want to spend my remaining years teaching undergraduate students at a liberal arts university in Japan.
Yeah, yeah,
But that's important,
yeah, and I definitely can see the great value in just, some people want to go to the summit and some people are still in the parking lot, just kind of like figuring out what
Yeah,
trailhead they're gonna start at,
yeah,
or
yeah,
people are still kind of like figuring out, what to pack, like, so there's all kinds of different places where someone can be on a mountain towards this path, and just kind of respecting everyone at the spot where they're at, and doesn't necessarily have to be a contest.
yeah,
But if you want to push yourself, you can push yourself. No, that's all really wonderful things to keep in mind. And then I did want to come back to your book, because you're basing that course around it. I'll just say it one more time. It's Jewels: An Introduction to American Buddhism for Youth, Scouts, and the Young at Heart. And this is there's a free download
yeah,
or the PDF that I can put into
yeah.
into where I'm gonna be posting
Yeah.
this. Um,
I'll send you my course description,
oh,
uh,
great.
course, and that also has a link to the download book.
Oh,
Yeah,
perfect, perfect,
yeah,
great. So we'll have it there. Reverend Tanaka, Ken, thank you so much
yeah,
for speaking with me today. I really appreciate
sure.
you taking the time, and I hope to catch up with you soon. And I really am excited for you and the BCA community to be celebrating 125 years very
Yeah.
soon.
Thank you. And yeah, best wishes with your it's great that you're doing this, and I'm sure that it's a learning experience for yourself, but it also is good for the audience out there to get and I like listening to people who are seekers or who are involved, rather than just reading about the doctrines and the teachings and the history. And in fact, in my course, let me just say briefly about my course is that I use my textbook, but it's easy reading. It's quite simple. And so much of the time, I invite one ordained priest and then a layperson to respond to the reading part. And then so we get, their perspective, and they can question me and I can question them. It's more listening to people who are, who are Buddhists, and people enjoy listening to others who are walking the same path. So I hope that your audience, if interested, they can join, and there is a little cost, but it's all donation, and they can even donate it to their favorite charity or to our course, which will also be the funds will be dedicated for propagating Buddhism, because I don't get paid, and the steering committee doesn't get paid, and we're just doing because it's part of what we need to do. Yeah.
Yeah. And is there just a general website where people can go to? I'll have everything in the description, but
Yeah.
just if in case anyone's just listening to it, what they would type in
Well,
to
no,
find you?
right now, I don't have a website, but the information will include a link, and they'll find all that information. And then if they have further questions, they can just send it to the email contact address.
Oh,
Yeah.
perfect. Okay, great,
Yeah.
wonderful.
Okay.
Well, thank you again, and I hope to check in soon.
Oh,
And congratulations on this course. I'm excited to
sure.
learn more about it.